Ross Andrew Parker was just 17 years old. Born on August 17th, 1984, in Peterborough, England, he was the youngest of two children, the beloved son of Tony and Davinia Parker. He had a girlfriend named Nicola, someone he deeply cared about. And to anyone who knew him, Ross was the kind of guy you just liked instantly, sweet, loyal, and a little cheeky. He loved football, watching it, playing it, living it. It was something he and his dad shared deeply. They supported the same team and watched every game together. It was their thing, just the two of them. That kind of bond that doesn't even need words. At school, Ross had earned himself a nickname, Half Pint. He was only 5 feet 5 inches, a little shorter than average, but he embraced it. It became part of his charm, part of who he was. He was studying business, halfway to earning his qualifications. And when he turned 18, he had big plans. He wanted to join the police, to make a difference, to protect people. In the meantime, he worked part-time as a barman at a local pub called the Solstice. That's actually where he met Nicola. They clicked, started spending time together, fall in love in that sweet, youthful way that feels so big and endless when you're 17. On the early morning of Friday, September 21st, 2001, Ross and Nicola were both finishing a late shift at the pub. It was around 1 a.m., and they decided to walk together to a friend's house. Nicola's friend was hosting a little get-together nearby, so they walked side by side down a quiet cycling path. But at around 1:15 a.m., everything changed. They were suddenly confronted by a group of around 10 men. Some wore balaclavas. Some held objects in their hands, though in the darkness, it was hard to tell what. One of them stepped forward and told Ross to run, but he couldn't. They had surrounded him. Then one of the men sprayed tear gas in Ross's face, blinding him. Disoriented, Ross couldn't see where to go. Another man punched him in the stomach. And then came the worst of it. Someone stepped behind Ross and stabbed him 3 times, in the chest and the throat, with a foot-long hunting knife. The blade went through his body. Twice, Ross fell to the ground, helpless. The group kept going. They kicked him, beat him. One of them even smashed his head with a hammer. Nicola did the only thing she could. She ran. She sprinted down the road to a nearby petrol station, borrowed a stranger's phone, and called 999. While on the phone with the operator, she heard Ross scream in pain twice. Then, by sheer luck, a police car passed by. She flagged it down, climbed in, and begged them to drive to the scene. She'd been gone for 5 minutes. But when they got back, it was already too late. The gang had vanished, and Ross was lying there alone, bleeding, gone. By the next morning, police had already opened a murder inquiry. But they knew, from the very start, that this wasn't going to be easy. This hadn't been the work of one person. Ross wasn't killed in some isolated attack. He had been ambushed, hunted down by a group of men, a gang, dangerous, coordinated, violent. And that changed everything. Because when violence like that happens, people don't always speak up. They're scared, terrified of what could happen if they talk. Members of the gang weren't going to turn each other in. And those who might have known something, neighbors, friends, people who heard whispers, were far too afraid to come forward. The police were stuck, and the community was shaken. But even in the face of fear, something powerful happened. People in Peterborough, families, shop owners, neighbors banded together. They knew that staying quiet would only protect the killers. So little by little, they pooled what they could and raised a £1,000 reward. Not because money could undo what had been done, but because it might move someone to speak. It was a small act, but it meant everything. Because when systems fail, it's often ordinary people who keep the fight for justice alive. In the days following Ross's murder, the police were overwhelmed with tips, most of them anonymous. And that told them something. People knew, but they were still too afraid to put their names to what they knew. Even so, those tips helped. Within a week of the attack, police arrested 12 men, all British Pakistani, all suspected of having some kind of involvement in the brutal killing of Ross Parker. But from the moment they were in custody, things took a disturbing turn. Every time the men were transported between police stations, inside the vans, they vandalized them. They trashed the interiors, tore things apart. They showed zero remorse. And then there were the chants. Even when they were separated, even when they were alone, each one of them repeatedly chanted the same disturbing things. Taliban. Osama bin Laden. They said it in the vans. They said it in the holding cells. They said it to the police during questioning. It was more than just a slogan. It felt like a declaration, like they were trying to send a message, like they wanted everyone to know exactly who they thought they were fighting, even if Ross Parker had nothing to do with any of it, even if he was just a kid walking his girlfriend home after work. And then, just 5 days after Ross's murder, 4 of the men were officially charged. Sarfraz Ali, Ahmed Ali Alwan, Shahid Nazir, Zairaf Marad, they were no longer just names whispered in fear. They were suspects, publicly and officially. But even with those charges, the pain and tension in Peterborough wasn't over. It was only just beginning. A year after Ross's murder, the 4 men finally stood before the court. Every single one of them pleaded not guilty to playing any role in Ross Parker's killing. But the trial would reveal things that no denial could hide. Let's take a moment to look at who these men were. Ahmed Ali Alwan, 22 years old, was known to refer to himself as a gangster. Police described him as having a kind of obsession or fantasy with knives. He wasn't just carrying weapons, he glorified them. It was a part of his image, his ego. Shahid Nazir, also 22, was married and had a young son. He was attending a local technical college, the same one attended by Zairaf Marad, who was 21. Sarfraz Ali was the oldest of the group at 25. He, too, was married, but his wife left him before the trial ever began. And you can't help but wonder, what did she know? What had she seen or heard? Because by the time the court heard the evidence, it was horrifyingly clear. These men were not only involved, they were talking about it, laughing about it. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from inside the police vans where the suspects had been transported. Officers had placed audio recorders in those vans, secretly, and the men talked freely about Ross's murder, assuming the police wouldn't understand because they weren't speaking in English. But police had translators, and what they uncovered was chilling. Shahid was heard describing the attack as a bloodbath. He even said that the third stab, the one to Ross's neck, split his throat wide open. Meanwhile, Ahmed and Zairaf were caught mocking the police, bragging about how they had lied in their statements, calling the officers gullible for believing them. And since the men had been held in custody for nearly a year before their trial began, investigators had time to dig even deeper. One of the most revealing moments came from a cellmate who had been housed with one of the suspects. He came forward with what he heard, conversations, details, confessions. The truth was becoming undeniable. These weren't men who acted in a moment of panic. They weren't remorseful. They boasted about what they did. And still, they sat in court, looked the jury in the eyes, and said, "Not guilty." In the lead up to the trial, even more chilling details began to surface, straight from the mouth of one of the killers. Ahmed Ali Alwan, while in custody, had several conversations with his cellmate, and what he revealed stripped away any remaining doubt about motive. He told his cellmate that he hated white people, and on the night Ross was murdered, he and the others had gone out with a purpose to shed white blood. Ross Parker didn't know these men. He hadn't wronged them. He was chosen at random, the wrong place at the worst possible time. This happened just 10 days after the September 11th attacks, a time when racial tensions were dangerously high all around the world, including in Peterborough. In the weeks that followed 9/11, there had been reports of racist remarks, hostility, and stereotyping, this time from white locals toward the Asian community. But Ross had nothing to do with any of that. He wasn't part of any hate. He was just walking with his girlfriend after work. Still, these men went out looking for someone, anyone, to hurt. Ross was simply in the way. Ahmed also confessed to his cellmate about his exact role in the murder. Not just the stabbing, but the planning, the cleanup, the entire process. He spoke about it like it was nothing, just something they'd done, something they were proud of. And when police searched their homes early in the investigation, they found nothing, at first, until they got to Shahid Nazir's house. There, in a shed in the back garden, which police believed served as some kind of group headquarters, they made a gruesome discovery. Inside were the murder weapons, along with in bags full of blood-soaked clothes. Some of the clothing was traced directly to the 4 men charged. But there were also extra clothes, extra shirts, extra pants, not linked to any of them. And that opened up a terrifying possibility. Were there more people involved? Other attackers who had never been identified? Did the group that killed Ross Parker go deeper than anyone ever realized? To this day, no one knows for sure. As the investigation deepened, police finally began to uncover the physical proof, the kind that doesn't lie, the kind that speaks louder than any courtroom denial ever could. The foot-long hunting knife, the same one that had been plunged through Ross Parker's body, still carried traces of blood. It had been washed, yes, but not well enough. And even through the attempted cleanup, Ross's blood remained. Alongside it was the hammer, the one used to strike Ross repeatedly in the head. Blood was found on that too. The injuries on Ross's skull were consistent with the pattern and weight of that very hammer. The match was precise, but it was what they found in the shed and on the clothing that drove it all home. Ross's blood wasn't just on shirts or pants. It was found on the inside of a shoe and soaked into the fabric of a sock. And that's significant because blood doesn't just seep into your sock unless you've inflicted injury with such violence, with such force, that the victim's blood soaks through your shoe. You don't get that kind of transfer from someone simply bleeding a bit. Ross must have been bleeding heavily, profusely, while being kicked over and over again. And whoever wore that sock, that it didn't just kick him, they brutalized him. 3 balaclavas were also found inside Shahid Nazir's house. Not the shed, inside the home. All of them had Ross's blood on them. And then came a heartbreaking moment, one that must have torn a family apart. Shahid's younger brother, Waqas, took the stand and testified against him. He told the court that on the night of Ross's murder, he saw his older brother in their kitchen, washing the murder weapons. And he wasn't alone. He saw the other 3 men there too, all of them covered in blood. Just like Shahid. Imagine how horrifying that must have been. To see that, to carry that, and then to speak it out loud in court. But that moment, Waqas's testimony, was one of the final pieces of the puzzle. Not just about what happened, but about who was willing to tell the truth, no matter how close to home it hit. Eventually, as the trial progressed and the evidence closed in around them, Ahmed Ali Awan, Shahid Nazir, and Zairaf Marad began to shift their stories. They admitted to parts of the attack. They confessed to kicking Ross, to spraying him with tear gas, and even to attempting to clean the weapons afterward. But when it came to the actual murder, to the stabbing, to the blows with the hammer, they all backed away. They claimed they hadn't done it. That part, they said, wasn't them. Instead, they all pointed their fingers at one person, Sarfraz Ali. According to them, Sarfraz was the one who used the knife. Sarfraz was the one who delivered the fatal wounds. They all said it. But here's the problem. Sarfraz denied everything. He told the court he hadn't even been there that night. He said he was at home, asleep, that he wasn't with them, that he had nothing to do with what happened to Ross Parker. But police already knew this was coming, because in the police van, long before the trial, Sarfraz had been recorded telling the others that this was the story they were going to go with. This is what I'm going to say. Just go along with it. And still, in court, that's what he said. He stuck to the lie, even as the rest tried to shift the weight of the killing onto him. But it didn't matter how they tried to split the guilt. It didn't matter who claimed they only kicked him, or sprayed him, or cleaned the knife. Because the truth was, Ross Parker was dead, and they were all there, and they all played a role in taking his life. On December 19, 2002, over a year after Ross Parker's murder, 3 of the men finally faced the consequences for what they had done. Sarfraz Ali, Ahmed Ali Awan, Shahid Nazir, all 3 were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Ahmed, who had openly expressed a hatred of white people and admitted to preparing for the attack, was given a minimum of 18 years before being eligible for parole. Shahid and Sarfraz, who were believed to have used the knife and the hammer, each received a minimum of 16 years. And because this sentencing happened in 2002, that means, as of now, both of them are eligible for release. Their fate now rests with the parole board. But perhaps the most shocking moment in the courtroom wasn't about who was convicted. It was about who walked free. Zairaf Marad, despite admitting to being there, despite admitting to kicking Ross, despite admitting to helping clean the murder weapons, was found not guilty. Not guilty of murder. Not guilty of manslaughter. Not even guilty of assault. He walked away with no prison time. And honestly, that part's hard to understand. Even police knew he was there. Even he said he was involved. But somehow, when a verdict was read, he was cleared of everything. and it leaves a bitter aftertaste. Because Ross didn't die from one man's hands. He died from a group attack, and Zyraf was part of that group. So how does someone confess to violence, to helping after the fact, and still walk away with nothing? It doesn't make sense. Not to Ross's family, not to the public, not to anyone who followed this case. And while the attackers claimed they were retaliating, striking back for the way Asian communities were treated after September 11th, that's not justice. That's not protest. That's racist violence, born from hate. And Ross Parker, he didn't hurt anyone. He was just a boy walking his girlfriend home. He was 17,